This video has been sponsored by Keeps. As a wise man once said, memes are the DNA of the soul.
Memes, the DNA of the soul.
And if that's true, then the soul of the legendary action game series Castlevania has been at war with itself for more than 2.5 decades now. You see, long ago, back during the churning fog of cultural memory known as the late 90s, one major and enduring meme of the gaming collective consciousness was already taking shape. It goes a little something like this. During the giddy gold rush of early 3D graphics, everyone and their mother was foolishly overhyped for Castlevania on the Nintendo 64. This was going to be the first big, flashy 3D cinematic incarnation of the series, making a true evolutionary leap forward for the entire genre of action platforming games. Of course, what everyone knows happened is that Castlevania on the N64, for simplicity's sake we'll call it Castlevania 64 from now on, it sucked hard. Castlevania 64 was the series reduced to a mere shadow of itself, vainly doing its best Steve Buscemi impression as it tried to fit in with a crowd that was way too young and hip for it. And meanwhile, in development on the rival Sony PlayStation was Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Under a shroud of darkness and secrecy, the Konami A-team was quietly and diligently refining the series' 2D sprite-based formula to a state of sublime gaming perfection. What emerged was a bolt out of the blue that spawned countless tributes and even more imitators, enduring as one of the most influential games ever made. So to this day, Symphony of the Night stands as the universally adored, shining exemplar of Vania perfection, while Castlevania 64 is regarded as the mediocre at best also-ran, doomed to languish forever in its sister's shadow, an evolutionary quirk that was interesting for a moment but absolutely worthless in the big picture, like Tailbones or the Appendix in Humans. And this meme endures.
Now there's a pretty meme. Exquisite.
While researching and getting ready to write this video script, I conducted a very brief survey of the written analysis and content around Castlevania 64. I'm talking the whole gamut here of contemporaneous reviews, YouTube videos and let's plays, think pieces and listicles, social media chatter, the whole shebang-a-bang. And what I uncovered was nothing short of a tidal wave of unmitigated slander against this game. These sentiments aren't just confined to old reviews or critiques that came out soon after the game's release, nor to the hyper-modern hot takery of the last few years. No, the loathing and nearly unhinged hatred for this game is almost universal down through the decades.
Here's what you need to know about this Castlevania.
Okay.
The worst?
Oh no! Really?
Nobody likes it.
Really?
It's just a horrible great.
And you know, considering that Castlevania is a series that is associated with the absolute best of the best in action gaming, well, this can't help but make Castlevania 64's black sheep status a pretty remarkable thing. For a series this beloved to give us a game this loathed, surely something must have gone terribly wrong. Of course, this meme had been greatly helped along by the fact that Koji Igarashi, the director of Symphony of the Night and one of the granddaddies of the Metroidvania genre himself, very publicly and spectacularly disowned Castlevania 64 over how poorly it was received. When he took over creative control of the series after Symphony of the Night, he pointedly kept Castlevania 64 out of the series' creative bible and the official timeline chronology, which is an incredibly heartless, graceless, and cold-blooded thing to do to fellow creatives who built this series alongside him, honestly. Even if we take Igarashi at his word that Castlevania 64 doesn't count because it's a side story, well, then why the heck is Castlevania Bloodlines part of the official chronology, my dude? In the almost 40 years that Castlevania has been around, pretty much the only other game in the series that is this publicly hated on is Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest on the NES.
This game sucks.
Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about all this and more in due time. Because what if I told you that the internet hivemind is wrong? Seriously. All the content creators, the posters, the commentators, the discourse experts, and yes, even the creator of one of my favorite games of all time, Lord Iga himself, they're as dead wrong as a freshly staked vamp shriveling in their coffin. Forget everything you've heard. Castlevania 64 is not an ill-conceived jank fest. It's not a stumble in the wrong direction for the series. It is not a horrible game that nobody should like. Castlevania 64 is an early 3D action survival horror Gesamtkunstwerk to rival the finest Resident Evil and Dino Crises. And it is perhaps the ur-text of modern 3D action game design, blazing its own trail that many others would later follow years and years before there was any consensus or industry best practices for what a 3D action adventure game should look or play like. Castlevania 64's combination of perilous exploration and tough-as-nails combat not only helped inaugurate the 3D Castlevania as a worthy series subgenre in its own right, it also sketched the early outlines of the revolution in 3D action RPGs that would eclipse the world exactly 10 years later. So before we go on, I'm happy to announce that we have a sponsor for this video, which is Keeps. So let's take a minute to check out what Keeps is and what they've got to offer to you. About 2/3 of men will experience some form of hair loss by the time they're 35, and for those who want to take preventative action before this starts or gets worse, Keeps offers you FDA-approved treatments to stop hair loss and improve hair growth, straight to your door. It's a subscription service that provides you with licensed doctor reviews of your specific case information online, straight from home, to distinguish the perfect, tailor-made treatment plan specifically for you, and then you get it shipped to your door every 3 months, at about half the cost of a traditional pharmacy. You get access to 24/7 care through a network of expert medical advisors, prescribers, and care specialists to find a routine that works for you. Each subscription comes with a full year of unlimited access to messaging communication with your specialists. Keeps treatments are clinically proven and fully FDA-regulated medications. Whether you're looking to prevent hair loss, stimulate hair growth, or just take better care of the hair you have, Keeps physicians help you find the products and treatments for your specific condition and goals. So if you say you're ready to take action, go to keeps.com/RagnarRox or click the link in the description to get 50% off your first order. That's keeps.com/RagnarRox with a double R. So, thanks a lot again, and now I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. No matter which Castlevania you're playing, the song remains the same. Every 100 years, Castle Dracula rips through its interdimensional portal to sow terror and evil across the land. And so, a brave vampire killer of the Holy Belmont lineage, or adjacent, steps up to take down Drac, as well as a cast of creeps amalgamated from classic Hammer horror flicks. The cycle repeats itself down through the generations, a chosen bloodline, their demonic vampire nemesis locked forever in eternal struggle. Wait, does that mean JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a Castlevania reference? This is why the series has always retained its moniker of Akumaju Dracula in Japan. A cursed journey through Dracula's demon castle is always the central element that binds these games together. And just like how the narratives of all the different Castlevania games unfold, there are likewise mechanical similarities to how these games play. Castlevania games are challenging, action-heavy, methodically paced experiences, which is why every dang video essay on this series makes such a huge deal about the intentional delay to the whip crack animation. Your attacks will commonly have that infamous half-second wind-up phase before they land, so like a stoner in public spaces, you have to be purposeful about how you time your hits. And that little bit of friction, that willingness to disempower the player and make the consequences of a mistake that much more palpable and painful, this is a big part of the secret sauce that makes Castlevania such a wonderful, enduring series. Your character always has a good degree of inertia and weight to their movement and attacks, not unlike it's common in the genre of cinematic platformers, so victory cannot be achieved by mindless button mashing and brute forcing your way through. You've got to go slow, observe your surroundings, time your movements carefully, and understand how the game's arsenal of tools can assist you in overcoming the challenges you're presented with. But focusing only on these overarching similarities is really a classic case of missing the Sylvania for the trans. Because for all of these likenesses, the mainline Castlevania games are just as famous for being radically creative and forward-thinking experiences, constantly reinventing themselves and pushing the medium of games forward in bold and often highly unexpected ways. Almost every mainline entry in the series stands apart from those that came before it. Castlevania 1 sets the action platforming format, then Castlevania 2 remixes the base mechanics into a sorta open world RPG adventure, then Castlevania 3 goes maximalist with multiple playable characters, branching level design, and non-linear progression. Rondo of Blood puts cinematic storytelling and high quality voiceover front and center, and then finally, Symphony of the Night synthesizes all of these different elements into a single sublime gestalt. Which brings us to the threshold of the legendary divergence that kicked off this video. It's at this exact moment during the mid to late 90s that the development of Castlevania forked into two distinct branches, each with its own proper history and legacy. There was the more traditional 2D platformer approach, which thanks to Symphony of the Night would go on to become the core of the Metroidvania RPG adventure genre. And then there was the 3D approach, represented by Castlevania 64, which would use the newfangled power of 3D acceleration to bring Castle Dracula to life on your home television. So while God Emperor Iga was quietly retooling the 2D Castlevania formula and preparing to unleash a world-eating revolution in game design, the other half of the Castlevania team was working on bringing the series into the new world of 3D on the Nintendo 64, a project dubbed Demon Castle Dracula Apocalypse for its Japanese release. Castlevania 64 is, in essence, a soft reboot / 3D remake of the first Castlevania game on NES. In much the same way that Super Castlevania 4 on the SNES was a 2D sprite-powered remake of the same title. The time? Mid-19th century Eastern Europe. The place? The province of Wallachia, amidst its craggy mountains and primeval forests. As was foretold in the ancient prophecies, Castle Dracula has risen once more, auguring a new age of evil for the world. Onto this stage step two lonely travelers who are all that can stop the coming apocalypse. Carrie Fernandez, a young mystic blessed with immense magical powers, and Reinhard Schneider, a whip-wielding descendant of the Belmont clan compelled by his cursed blood to take the fight to Drac's doorstep. And so our story begins in the Forest of Silence at the outskirts of Castle Dracula. Here, the player is given ample time and breathing room to get accustomed to the new control scheme and to acquaint themselves with some of the cool new moves available. In addition to the holy trinity of jumping, kneeling, whipping, the player now can look around in first-person POV, slow walk, perform a running slide, and whip out a close-range weapon for quick attack. All of the classic Vania sub-weapons are here too, sporting sleek new 3D facelifts. Daggers, axes, holy water, and crosses. Everything a vampire killer needs to paint the town red. Literally. Mobility gets a serious upgrade as well, with movement controls switching from the directional pad to the N64's analog stick. While jumping, the player can now grab ledges and clamber up onto them, opening up whole new modes of vertical and horizontal exploration that are only possible thanks to the three-dimensional game space. And even here, in this somewhat understated opening level, we can see how the team behind Castlevania 64 made expert use of the N64's hardware, not just by wringing out every iota of power they possibly could, but also by being highly creative with how they played to the console's strengths as well as camouflaged its weaknesses. The game's textures are slightly muddy, but that's par for the course for the N64, given the built-in texture interpolation. It smudges over everything on screen. And this muddiness is really only a tertiary factor at best, thanks to the stunning art design on offer. The environmental art is gorgeous, the models are well proportioned and smoothly animated, making every scene feel impeccably well realized. There's something of lost art in ludic art design, the skillful and intentional use of low-res bilinear filtered textures. Yes, these individual textures that make up the environment or the enemies or the character models, they are undeniably muddy because of the technical limitations of the era in which they were produced. Though muddy they may be, they also still look dashing because they were chosen and assembled with great care by talented artists who had a serious knack for scene composition using the most minimal resources available to them. Today, our go-to shorthand for a retro nostalgia type of game is always some variation of the crispy, pixelated, and unfiltered kind of texture work that is meant to evoke a bygone era. And sure, this is a quick and easy way to give your game a certain hauntological allure. But show me someone who can make low-res, bilinearly filtered textures look as good as they do in Castlevania 64, and I'll show you a true retro artist at work. So, considering that Castlevania 64 was released in January 1999, it's fair to say that this game arrived towards the beginning of the end of the N64's life cycle. Not to mention the tail end of the console generation represented by the PlayStation, Saturn, N64 War of Three Kingdoms. So in that sense, Castlevania 64 is very much a mid to late generation game, where the development team is now expertly acquainted with the hardware they're working on and are able to squeeze more juice than anyone thought was possible out of the humble N64. For a perfect example of what I'm talking about very early on in the playthrough, check out this little side hallway between the villa level's main foyer and the Rose Garden. At this point, we're knee-deep in our journey through the dark heart of Dracula's estate, so the game is quite liberal with cutscenes and other cinematic curios like this to provide an appropriately epic and emotional frame for the player's quest. The construction of the whole mise-en-scène of this hallway is extremely simple in technical terms. We've got some basic repeating textures for the fence and shrubs, some very smooth texture skew and rotation to create the illusion of roiling storm clouds raging in the background, complete with flashes of lightning, and some wonderfully atmospheric sound effects tying everything together. Taken together, this imparts the game world with a powerful sense of place, giving Castle Dracula the kind of concrete physicality that just wasn't possible like that on the NES or SNES. Now this might seem like bone-simple 3D design by modern standard. It is, but again, it really can't be understated that in January 1999, before the turn of the millennium, this represented absolute bleeding-edge technical wizardry. And this scene is practically a diorama in miniature, a proof of concept showing off the incredible artistic flair that is evident across the game's 5 to 6 hour runtime. Castlevania 64 doesn't just front-load all this good stuff into the first hour either. There are plenty of other equally charming and beguiling scenes that will greet the player along their journey. There's Rosa in her rose garden immediately after the hallway, the chance meeting with Vincent in the villa's opulent bedchambers, the lavish adornments of Castle Dracula's central keep, the mad scramble from one diabolical tower of terror to the next in the game's final chapter. The fact that the game not only looks this good, but also plays this smoothly is nothing short of a minor miracle. For comparison, Ocarina of Time had come out just 2 months prior, and let's be honest here, this game runs like absolute butt on the base N64 hardware. You're lucky if in most places you hit the hard ceiling of 20 frames per second while playing, and dips down into single-digit frame rates are not uncommon. Meanwhile, Castlevania 64 is a game that is self-evidently just as beautiful, just as detailed, and just as graphically demanding as Ocarina of Time, and it runs at a rock-solid 30 frames per second at almost all times on the console. Keep in mind, this was an era when 3D gaming was still very much in its infancy, with Quake, Mario 64, and Final Fantasy VII all barely past their second birthdays. Half-Life and Ocarina of Time had both come out only 2 months prior, so in early 1999, if you wanted a game like Quake or Half-Life to run at a solid 30 frames per second on your home PC, that meant you needed some of the most expensive and advanced tech available, like one of those sick Voodoo Graphics 3DFX cards. Honestly, the most unkind thing you can say about Castlevania 64's graphics is that the devs really cranked up the dial on the early 3D fog effect, mostly in the outdoor scenes, in order to mask the low draw distance. But once again, this is a conscious design choice that is down to the technical limitations of the hardware of the era. And Castlevania 64 is packed with the kind of expert level and environmental designs that help smooth out these shortcomings. So back to the mission at hand. Carrie and Reinhardt arrive at the outskirts of Dracula's estate, make their way through the Forest of Silence, and before long, they're knocking on Satan's door. Awaiting them is the entire classic Vania Castlevania bestiary, updated in brand sparkling new 3D.
Kung Fu Wolfman, Frankenstein, and Mummy were there, and Medusa had to catch you unawares in midair.
So never fear, because all of the classic Castlevania baddies are here, monster mashing in 3D, skeletons chucking their own tibias at you, bone dragons belching flames, Medusa heads laying waste to your best laid platforming plans. Even the behemoth from Rondo of Blood makes a cameo appearance as a boss fight, complete with half-rotted torso. But Castlevania 64 brings plenty of new material design-wise to the table as well. And there's one particular masterstroke of creative design that has become synonymous with the Castlevania 64 experience, and for good reason. We're talking about Japanese sensibilities being unleashed to give birth to what is nothing short of the single greatest enemy design in the history of retro video gaming. the motorcycle skelements. How any game that features motorcycle skeletons could ever get such a bad rep is truly beyond me. Actually, we need to back up for a second. Because the good vibes don't just arrive alongside the motorcycle skeletons riding shotgun in the sidecar. This game is positively dripping with style and atmosphere as soon as you slide the console switch to the on position and arrive at the title screen. The mysterious young lad Malice plays a mournful tune on his violin, capturing a moment that is instantly iconic for fans of the series. Here are some of Castlevania 64's greatest strengths in their full glory. Expert music and sound design paired with super expressive models and animations. So before the player even presses a single button, the game already has inspired countless covers and cosplay acts. And as we rejoin our heroes as they progress through to the heart of Castle Dracula, you can't help but notice how the entire soundscape of this game, the score, the sound effects, the use of musical cues, both subtle and not, it all just whips ass. There are the thunderous cracks of lightning felling trees in your path as you approach the gates. Which are matched by the uber-satisfying thwacks that register with each direct hit you make with your main weapon. There's the killer, pun intended, use of sound cues to differentiate enemy types, with foes having their own unique and memorable sonic palettes announcing their arrival, some of which are truly blood-curdling. There's that iconic castle exploration tune, which is both a bop and a jam. And of course, there's a diabolical clock tower full of clangorous machinery, soundtracked by organ and harpsichord music. True, there's none of the swaggering rock opera orchestration of Symphony of the Night here. Castlevania 64 was packed on a humble, space-limited 12MB N64 cartridge, which is about average for the size of an N64 game. Meanwhile, PlayStation used gargantuan by comparison 700MB CD-ROMs, which left ample room for high-quality voiceover and music tracks. But in the same spirit of doing a lot with a little that prevailed with the graphics and game design, Castlevania 64 features a handful of high-quality clips, including voiced lines, and pushes its MIDI engine to the absolute limits to compensate. What results are expansive orchestral tones and ambient soundscapes that evoke the feeling of old school horror films like The Man Who Laughs or F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu. So yeah, when you compare that to Symphony of the Night, it's a pretty sharp contrast to an ultra-modern rock opera starring the sweltered Pan Dampier from pansexual Castlevania. Slight digression, but holy shit, can you guys believe that Rocky Horror was Tim Curry's debut acting role in a motion picture? And yeah, the joke totally works because the Castlevania animated series confirmed that Alucard is bi as a matter of fact, so checkmate, atheists.
He shouldn't die. Yes, fuck you.
Of course, Castlevania 64 just doesn't look great and sound great. It really also plays and feels just like you'd expect a modern 3D update of the 8 and 16-bit Castlevanias to play and feel. There's more than a few Metroidvania cues here, harking back to Simon's Quest, which is technically the father of it, even before Symphony of the Night, to complement the focus on 3D exploration and platforming. Rather than progressing linearly from point A to point B, You must explore around the castle, keep an eye out for environmental cues and clues, collect keys, flip switches and levers. You already know what it is. But if you're still not quite ready to accept that Castlevania 64 is a true blue 3D Metroidvania worthy of standing alongside to Symphony of the Night with that moniker, then I hope you're sitting down right now, because it's time to present the most damning piece of evidence for this case. You're ready? The Supreme Court of Metroidvania ruled in favor of Castlevania 64. Case dismissed. And yeah, as I keep gushing about, there was a huge amount of care and attention paid to the player and enemy models, which all boast lavish and fluid animation. This stuff is seriously mind-boggling for 1999. The skeletons look like skeletons. The bats and Medusa heads look like bats and Medusa heads. The protagonists, Reinhard Schneider and Carrie Fernandez, look like the kinds of Castlevania heroes who stroll right up to Dracula's front gate and crack their whip like a starter's pistol. Now, what's this I hear the fuckboys in the back of the class saying?
Well, Ragnar, bisexual vampires are all well and good, but having a playable character who hurls magic rings as her attack and is basically a Mahou Shoujo sorceress, this is just too anime for Castlevania.
Buddy, sit back down because I'm about to rock your world all over again.
My family are vampire hunters too, so I guess that means we should be friends now.
Sure, friends. But Maria, you're too young for this. You just let the big hunter here take care of that bad man, okay?
Oh, you don't know anything. I can handle this just fine.
A lot of the hate for this game comes down to unflattering comparisons of Castlevania 64 to its 2D counterparts, especially Symphony of the Night, which, staying just within the context of Nintendo games, is like saying that Super Mario 64 sucks because Super Mario World is an objectively better platformer. And yeah, no shit. But even if Mario 64 isn't as quote-unquote objectively good as its predecessors, its impact is such that it may very well end up being more influential, more important, and therefore more enduring than any Mario game that came out before or after it.
Here we go!
But that's just a theory. As another throw-in relating to that, I've generally adapted over the years to stop thinking in terms of is game good, or is game bad, or is game A better than game B, because good and better as adjectives really don't say anything of actual value and are not quantifiable. I find the question, does the game achieve what it intends, much more fruitful. And Castlevania 64 absolutely does, no question. Because there is so much that this game does well that can only be done in 3D and had never been done before in 3D, especially within the Castlevania context. It's as simple as that. Take the first boss fight. As you open the gates to the arena, the camera pans behind the player and the doors part to reveal a giant screen-filling Skeleman. This is a white-knuckle thrill ride of an upgrade to the larger bosses of the earlier Castlevanias, which technically can't manage anything more than a slow shuffle march onto the screen. Even Symphony of the Night took until the absolute mega secret final fight to bust out a boss that looked and felt remotely as impressive in perceived scale and impact. There's also the open-ended and environmentally driven 3D exploration, which is qualitatively different from how progression works in a 2D game like Symphony of the Night. Castlevania 64 is all about careful observation of environmental details with a few adventure game-style deductive reasoning puzzles thrown in for good measure. For example, at one point you'll need to rendezvous with the mysterious keeper of the Rose Garden, who you're told will only appear to tend her flowers at dawn. In gameplay terms, this means visiting the Rose Garden room when the in-game clock is between the hours of 3 AM and 6 AM. Yes, just like Simon's Quest, Castlevania 64 structures the exploration and gameplay loop around a repeating day-night cycle. The bitch is back, and the horrible night to have occurs is returned with a vengeance. Enemies and the environment will change depending on the time of days. Some doors will open, others will close, and certain foes will be weaker or stronger. As I teased before, I firmly intend to get to Simon's Quest in a future video if there's interest for it, but I just want to say how asinine I find it that this feature always got so universally loathed thanks to the droves of angry YouTube video game philosophers, because it is a really, really cool idea and feature that gives the world an inescapable feeling of a life of its own, coupled with palpable unease in the player, which is an emotion that feels incredibly on point to invoke when venturing into the outliers and bowels of literally Dracula's castle. I feel like it got panned because it's not fun, but daunting. But boy-oh, is it emotionally resonant with the setting. I love it, always loved it. And oh yeah, after your encounter in the Rose Garden, you need to go back and find another NPC to get the key to the next area. Only now, if you try to visit him while it's still nighttime, you'll find that he's asleep in the villa's guest bedroom. And so you've got to wait till daylight hours, or burn a sun card until he wakes up. But of course, this is Castlevania, a series where unintended consequences might as well be the subtitle. And with Castlevania 64, we're talking about a for-the-time bleeding-edge intersection of technology and design. So of course, they added some brutal, game-altering hidden consequence mechanics, Silent Hill 2 style. As the clock ticks by in Castlevania 64, the game is secretly tallying down an invisible karma meter in the background. And if the player takes too long to finish the game and depletes their karma meter all the way, they're doomed to get a more dire ending. The darkest timeline, where the only Red Dead Redemption is how those dang red skeletons keep getting back up over and over again. There's also the demon shopkeeper Renault, aka the Castlevania professional, aka video game timeline Jean Renault, but not the Onimusha timeline Jean Renault, the Castlevania timeline Jean Renault. Man, talk about being the hardest working guy in the show with. Anyway, Renault sells you helpful curatives throughout your journey, as part of you signing a not at all Faustian contract when you meet him. But if you spend too much money at his shop, he has an unpleasant surprise waiting for you right before the boss. You really should have read that contract before you signed it. See, by spending more than 30,000 gold at his shop, you have forfeited the right to your eternal soul, which means you now have to face Big Boss Renault, who is an even tougher bastard than Dracula. It is pure ludonarrative brilliance, and if you think that's brutal, just wait till we get to the vampire status effect in Legacy of Darkness. So, we've just spent the last however many minutes gushing about what an actually excellent, well-realized, and forward-thinking game Castlevania 64 was/is. But all this high praise begs an important question. It's one thing for the game to get a second look more than 2 decades after the fact, sure, but why exactly was this game so controversial, so poorly received, and ultimately so disliked in the first place? Well, for one thing, the whole genre of 3D action games was still very much in its infancy when Castlevania 64 had arrived. Most of the big hitters of the era were fairly new themselves. Tomb Raider and Resident Evil came out in 1996, Ocarina of Time and Resident Evil 2 released in 1998, and Soul Reaver wouldn't debut for another 6 months after Castlevania 64. I point all this out to emphasize 3D action gaming may have already existed as a tentative genre by the time Castlevania 64 was released, but that didn't mean that the general gaming public was as familiar with the genre as they are now, 2.5 decades later. Putting it slightly differently, there simply wasn't the same shared universal grammar for designing and respectively for playing these games that we enjoy today now that 3D action is near totally ubiquitous. If you're a lifelong video game aficionado like myself, most of the time when you see a 3D action game and pick up the controller, your brain goes into autopilot mode because it's been so conditioned by highly conventionalized input responses. The left stick moves the character, the right stick rotates the camera, the bottom face button is for jumping, and the left face button attacks. It's practically second nature. But have you ever watched someone who has little or even no familiarity with video games pick up a controller and try to play twin stick style, whether it's a shooter, a platformer, or any other kind of action game? They're going to struggle more than just a little bit and have an awkward time playing for a good while until the brain-to-screen interface becomes so intuitive that it disappears from their active perception, or more simply put, they're just not accustomed to using a modern controller. Even something as simple as moving the left and right sticks at the same time, it takes practice until it's as intuitive as riding a bike or driving a car as it is for battle-hardened video game veterans. And look, if you're the type of person who will only be convinced when someone in a white lab code offers you tables of data to support the assertion, there's loads and loads of scientific research confirming that the ability to manipulate objects in 3D space is indeed a learned skill, one closely tied to memory, cognition, conditioning, and other brain behavior. Which is why, for a moderately seasoned player in the present day, Castlevania 64 is actually pretty straightforward and easy to get your head around. You may die a few times while you get used to the somewhat old-fashioned camera and controls, but it's overall a highly intuitive and approachable experience. Now, this is still a Castlevania game. There are still going to be insta-death falls down bottomless pits. There are still deadly spike and guillotine traps that catch you totally unawares. And there are those fuck you flying Medusa heads who knock you off your jump midair with barely a warning or chance to dodge at them. Again, it is a Castlevania game. These things come with the territory. But back in 1999, at a time when 3D action didn't even exist as a proper genre yet, these kinds of games were just quite a bit more difficult to grasp, even for hardcore gamers. Dual analog controls weren't even a thing yet. Which is exactly why Castlevania 64 was so slagged off for its erratic camera or janky platforming. It's easy to imagine most players, even or especially ones familiar with the previous 2D Castlevania games, coming to 64 and expecting the action to move at the same speed and cadence right out of the gate. But if you try to play this game like Rondo of Blood or Symphony of the Night, you're gonna have a bad time. There's no other way around it. Castlevania 64 has a survival horror-esque pacing to it in comparison. The player must carefully contemplate their every move, owing to the good amount of delay and inertia present in your walk cycle, your jumps, and your attacks. An example from Castlevania 64's first level is instructive. A player who is a hot hand at Mario or Sonic is gonna feel like they can jump down these ledges in quick succession because that's pretty much exactly how it goes in 2D games. But if you try to take that same approach here, you're gonna eat shit badly. Probably make the first 2 or maybe 3 jumps, but at a certain point the camera will start shifting, changing the direction of your jump art relative to the analog stick, which means if you keep charging forward, you're gonna jump in the wrong direction and plunge a certain death. Either that or the inertia of your movement makes it impossible to safely stop on the next ledge. Pull up just about any narrated Let's Play of Castlevania 64 and 9 out of 10 YouTubers are gonna make endless complaints about this exact part of the game. Broken game, terrible design, janky platforming, unfair, what a bunch of diarrhea dookie farts. So how then do we untangle this veritable Gordian knot of 3D platforming? The answer might surprise you. Take your time.
You never see it coming.
Jump, then pause, and plan your next move. Then jump again, and pause again, and plan again. And wouldn't you know it, slow and steady does win the race. This is exactly the approach that people loved so much about the original Tomb Raider games. It works just as flawlessly and satisfactorily in Castlevania 64, but I can only guess and quote myself for the 100th time probably, the expectations with which we approach games greatly influence our capacity to enjoy them. So I ask you, dear viewer, to be honest and objective, is what you're seeing here really bad game design from doo-doo brain developers? Or is the game trying to impart a lesson, a cardinal rule you'll need to keep close to heart if you're going to survive your quest through Castle Dracula? The same lesson that you've learned with the Holy Water in the first stage of Castlevania 1, some 13 years prior, that everybody gushes about brilliant game design. It'd be really easy to make this video nothing but a tedious laundry list of responses to the different common critiques of this game. But I think this would be a huge mistake, because it basically treats these critiques as though they're good faith arguments worthy of debate. Which, just like Ben Shapiro and PragerU, they're really not. Responding to them is only doing their work for them. More than any other single determinative factor, it is beyond apparent that Castlevania 64's main quote-unquote flaw has very little to do with the experience of actually playing it. This game simply had the bad luck of coming out less than a year after Symphony of the Night, the most famous game in the series and one of the most important and influential games of all time. Players were no doubt primed to expect a fast and furious, polygonal-flavored helping of more Metroidvania boom perfection. Instead, what they got was a slower-paced 3D recreation of the semi-non-linear gameplay first introduced in the hated and unrightfully underappreciated Castlevania II: Simon's Quest. Or, as it's become known in recent years in the YouTube gamer space, Castlevania II: Rolfsbane. This made it a whole lot easier to focus on Castlevania 64's minor imperfections, or the many things it did well. And not just regular well, like amazingly well. Seriously, try to find another 3D action game that handled auto-targeting this well in early 1999. It makes a Z-targeting in Ocarina of Time look and feel like absolute chump shit. Expert touches like this make this game still a joy to play through all those years later, if you approach it with the right mindset. Castlevania 64 also saw a follow-up in the form of the Legacy of Darkness Director's Cut, which came out in December 1999, a little less than a year after release. This updated re-release adds new mechanics, improves the graphics, adds more levels, and best of all, greatly expands the gameplay variety with 4, count them, new playable characters, each with their own unique movesets and story modes. So let's review, shall we? A 3D action game with tough as nails combat and some challenging platforming besides, where you're dropped into a mysterious and atmospheric world with minimal guidance, and must make use of your powers of deductive reasoning and your keen eye for environmental detail to solve puzzles and overcome your foes, and where you will die over and over and over again, all as part of not just the fun, but even the narrative implications of the story and lore. Again, if I was a more SEO-hungry type of YouTuber, it'd be super easy to make this whole video pure, unadulterated, soul-born Elden Ring clickbait. I've already been there. But I think that the case has already been made well enough, so there's not much need to belabor this point any further. Plus, I really don't want to see this part of the video get clipped and posted one of those brutal, "It's just like Dark Souls" parody social media accounts. Because, you know. Indeed, in every way but the bonfire mechanic, Castlevania 64 is one of the earliest evolutionary ancestors to the insurgent revolution that is currently dominating gaming. From the motorcycle skeletons to Big Daddy Bone Wheel, the Legacy of Darkness lives on. So, it's time to step into the confession booth for a moment. Forgive me, Daddy Alucard, for I have sinned. Because maybe the title of this video essay isn't 100% accurate or intellectually honest if you disregard the sneaky asterisk next to the word everyone. I know, a YouTuber exaggerating for dramatic effect, like what else is new? So here is the asterisk. Perhaps, just maybe, the dreaded games journalists were actually right about Castlevania 64. You see, when this game was released, it actually got quite decent reviews in the mainstream gaming press. Go on Metacritic right now and check out the averages for yourself. A very respectable 7 3/4 out of 10. And these initial reviews are quite complimentary too, if you click through and read them. It all seems to suggest that Castlevania 64 really is exactly what it looks like. An incredibly solid 7 out of 10 game that maybe has some roughness around the edges, but nevertheless is very well realized and brings some excellent new ideas to the table. There you have it. A score like this is not an insult, but actually the highest of compliments in my book, because it speaks to the game's sheer creativity and boundary-pushing design philosophy. I've said this countless times already, but give me a really interesting 7 out of 10 game any day of the week or the last and most edgelessly polished 10 out of 10 AAA mass appeal appeaser. This game's black sheep status was spun entirely out of whole cloth by the fandom. And why did they do it? For the clicks and the attention? For the Joker energy lulls? For some vague, ineffable feeling of having one's expectations burned because Castlevania 64 was so different from Symphony of the Night? Who can say? The coercive power of internet groupthink can make people believe the craziest shit. And
some men just want to watch the world burn.
Watch the wane. But things look different in the light of 2022. Dark Souls has become one of the biggest series in the world by doing exactly what Castlevania 64 did, only with the refinement of over a decade of game design evolution under its feet, at a grander scale and in glorious high definition. Hell, you could even draw further comparisons between the reception of Castlevania 64 and that of games like King's Field and Demon's Souls. Because just like Castlevania 64, these were incredibly solid 7 out of 10 games across the gaming press that when they first came out earned, in part, fairly tepid reactions from everyone but the absolute most die-hard evangelists. There was plenty of grousing in the early reviews and in the wider gaming discourse about how Demon's Souls was clunky, how it had bad game design, how it was too slow, too confusing, or too difficult for anyone except the most hardcore RPG-devouring basement dwellers. It's only in retrospect, with the hindsight of Dark Souls kicking off a worldwide and well-selling cultural phenomenon, that people can say with confidence, oh yeah, King's Field and Demon's Souls, they were legendary 10 out of 10 games that made From Software the totally beyond criticism studio they are today. Now normally this is the point in these essays where I crack the whip and sprinkle some holy water over these goddamn major studios and publishers for how little they care about preserving game history. However, with Castlevania, it's not all doom and gloom. In recent years, Akuma Konami has released several really well put together collections that allow you to play the classic Vanias on modern hardware. There's the Castlevania Anniversary Collection on all modern systems, featuring games 1 through 4, Bloodlines, 2 of the Game Boy Castlevanias, and the never-seen-in-the-West Kid Dracula. This one is easily worth the 5 bones you'll pay for it on a sale. And there's the Castlevania Requiem Collection on PS4 and PS5, which brings together Symphony of the Night and Rondo of Blood in one toss. Recently, Symphony of the Night also got standalone iOS and Android ports, which are pretty decent from what I hear, but I can't confirm that from personal experience though. And just a few months back, we saw the release of Castlevania Advance Collection, which brings together the Game Boy Advance Vania trilogy for PC, Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox. So overall, a mixed bag, but mostly positive, and still admittedly a good bit more of a damn than most publishers give about their legacy catalog. And yet, sadly, out of all the old school Castlevanias, there is one title that is conspicuously absent from this list: Castlevania on the N64. There's no word on exactly why this game is still languishing in darkness, but if the recent Nintendo Switch Online N64 games are any indication, it's very likely because N64 emulation is still really tricky to do well. Even modern hardware that theoretically has hundreds of times the horsepower can still choke while emulating the N64 because the console was just that complicated and obtuse to program for. I mean, even Nintendo themselves couldn't help but fuck up their own implementation of N64 emulation on the Switch. The state of retro game preservation is really that dire. All of which is to say,
the wind seems to be freshening. The tide is with us.
Hoist the Jolly Roger and sail the seas, my friends, because it looks like no one else is going to do it for you. As always,
Say the line, Bart!
I've added a link in the description that helps you set up an emulator to play this game on Windows 10 hardware so you can do it for yourself. Now, while we're in the middle of talking about the utterly abysmal state of video game preservation, if you've been following my content, you know that this is one of the core aims of many of my videos, to inform and bust through the neglective treatment of many of the big publishers regarding their dragon-hoarded IP treasures. Now, wouldn't you know it, but my good friend and co-writer Michael Saba, you might already be familiar with his content, has just launched a big, long-in-the-works video essay about Panzer Dragoon Saga that's simultaneously an extremely in-depth investigation into the current state of video game preservation that I consider absolute mandatory viewing if you have just the faintest interest in the topic. In fact, if you've enjoyed this video, chances are high you're going to dig Michael's video as well, because he was the one who actually wrote the script for it and even had a hand in the video editing. Michael's been an integral part in this channel's creative output and production for years, so this pitch for his Panzer Dragoon video game preservation video essay comes as easy for me as Sunday pizza. Like, this really turned out a stunning piece, easily one of the best and most comprehensive video essays on video game preservation I've seen, while at the same time a love letter to one of the best games to ever grace a Sega Saturn, so don't miss this. And so, some 2 decades plus after it first graced our TV screens and home consoles, we can all breathe a little easier. Dracula's curse has been broken, and Castlevania 64 can now take its rightful place in the pantheon of manias, alongside that other pretty good 3D action game they slapped Hideo Kojima's name all over, even though it was barely involved. But as any seasoned vampire killer knows, the breaking of one curse is never the end of the saga. It's only the beginning. Because as inevitably and inexorably as the march of time itself, the full moon will one day rise alongside a new Dark Lord. One we must needs confront in holy combat.
The morning sun has vanquished the horrible night. How about vanquish this horrible game?
One day, just as we have delivered Castlevania 64 from evil and cleansed the land of the malefactor's touch, so too will we deliver justice for Simon's Quest. Man, I gotta say, I was just looking back and realized that this channel has just surpassed its 8th birthday. Can you believe that? Like, the first video I ever released was all the way back in 2014, and yeah, my style and direction has definitely changed a lot over the years. But it really gives me pause, thinking that there are people who've literally been watching my videos all the way back since then and stuck around until now. Makes me incredibly grateful, honestly. For anyone watching and sticking around, no matter for how long, like, even if it has become my daily full-time job and I've acquired a lot of experience and routine with the whole craft and process, it still regularly baffles me and makes me want to say thank you from the heart. If this was your first video of mine and you've enjoyed it, hey, I'm Ragnar and I largely cover either horror games, old games, indie games, or combinations, and you'll probably find a good bit in my backlog right now that you might enjoy. And yeah, I'm far from done with what I'm doing. There's lots of great games and topics I want to cover, and I keep being excited for what's to come. I enjoy this, and you guys are a big part of that and make this possible. Those who tune in regularly and watch my videos, and also those who support me on Patreon. Without the ongoing financial support of my backers, that's a fact, I wouldn't be here anymore. So thank you, humbly. And if you're considering to help out the channel as well, feel free to hop over to my Patreon and join the community with a monthly pledge within your comfort levels. It really does make a big difference. So before we go, as always, a big special thanks to my top tier supporters this month. Thank you to Ian Rhodes, Lawrence A. Buben, Amber Wiggins, Max Macula, Tara Flops, Giselle Almonte, Boris Bugling, Catherine Escobar, Dana Rosa, Terry Collins, Kevin H. Yang, Serena Abramson, Uziel1447, Hippo Hobley, Thwagam, Lillian B, Laird Wackala, Ronan Crom, aka Daniel242172, Swiss Hackmod, Dr. Haley Isabella Colley, Shannon Blue, Billy Lott, Hunter Crawford and Margaret Strawn, Gehennas, Aurora Milpomene Crescendo, Maura Casardes, Nikot the Brave, Nathan Gillick, Kyle Lee, Kerry George, Chris Z, Matt Gretton, Tabby, Kenan Ward, Morgan K, Daniela Alvarez, Beruga Dono, 9ball9606, Federico Rocha, Chuck Taylor, Refkins, Jin Hansen, Casper Ron, Cordelia Crescendo, Glebin, The Spiral Architect, David Zelenak, Vasily Prokhorov, Agustin Ortega, Isabella Stoner, Neil Snowden, Dylan Labonte, Amanda Christensen, Thomas Bona, Refkins and Triscuits, Raisha Griggs, Corey Marr, Alex Popov, and Samantha. Until next time, ta-ta!